Hey everybody, welcome back to my backyard. You can tell it's a Sunday night. Just got finished watching the Eagles and my son play baseball. And I was going through all the different quizzes that we did, the last one we did, and I looked at there's three big things that as a whole group we missed. So I want to take some time and explain those three big things. The first one being that the French and Indian War, how it helped cause the American Revolution. That's one that kind of mixed us up. The second one being this proclamation of 1763. And the third one, these Townshend Acts. So I want to talk about briefly about each of these, and then you can look at you know, um, how they interact or how they help cause the American Revolution. So if we remember, three nations colonized the Americas, right? Along the eastern coast, we had the British nation, the English. West of the Appalachian Mountains, you have the French. And then way west, we talked about the Spanish. But they don't really come into play here because what happens, the French and Indian War is part of this larger 7 Years' War, right? And it's part of this thing between France and England who have hated each other for centuries upon centuries. And a lot of it comes down to control of the valuable beaver trade because these valuable beaver pelts were thick, really thick because of the cold water that the beavers lived in. And they helped to make these great hats that in London, these people paid top dollar for these hats. So as we were fighting over control of the Mississippi River, the River Valley, the Ohio River Valley, and the beaver fur, the beaver pelts, we fought this 7-year-long war, again, the British colonists and the British against the French and the Native American allies. The English do win, drive the French from the continent, and the English colonies are kind of set in stone. But they passed this law, this proclamation line in 1763. They say nobody can go west of the Appalachian Mountains. And the reason being, they couldn't really provide for safety of colonists if they're west of the Appalachian Mountains. And it costs money if you're out there, right? You've got to send troops, you've got to build forts, and it's expensive to do so. But the colonists were upset. They were mad because really a lot of them had already purchased land out there, and they were used to kind of doing their own thing. And all of a sudden now they're being told by the British, you can't go there. So this sets the stage for more conflict. And in 1765, we have the very first time there's a tax passed put onto the colonists, and it's called the Stamp Act. Right? And the Stamp Act was a tax on anything printed, basically legal documents, newspapers, playing cards, dice, whatever it was had to be stamped to prove you paid the tax. Well, the colonists were quite upset, and you'll see a pattern will develop beginning with the Stamp Act. The British will pass a law. They'll think the colonists won't be too upset with it. The colonists get mad. They protest. Here in the Stamp Act, they had a thing called the Stamp Act Congress. You'll see that a little bit later. The British will repeal it and kind of replace it with something else, and we repeat the cycle, right? So they do take the tax away, but in 1767, 2 years later, there's another tax place called the Townshend Acts, right? The British needed money. The British Empire was hurting. And in 1767, the guy who's in charge he was a prime minister, his name was Townshend, Lord Townshend, and he decided that he was going to start this tax on anything that was being imported into the colony. He said, it kind of makes sense. Like, if it's coming from somewhere else, the colonists wouldn't be too upset paying for it. So things on like taxes on lead, paper, paint, glass, tea, anything that was coming from outside of the colonists would have to pay taxes on it. He also thought the colonists wouldn't be that upset because all the money collected from it would go directly to running the colonies, helping them to stay safer, running their governments, whatever it might be. But as you can imagine, the colonists were upset. We have the Sons and Daughters of Liberty. We have to start to write pamphlets. We have this whole idea of no taxation without representation, right? And they start to write these things called circular letters. They write pamphlets. You're going to look at all these different things later. And the Townshend Acts and the revolt against them, or the argument against them, it's really the beginning of the revolutionary ideas. And in 1774, shortly after the Townshend Acts are repealed, we have a whole new shift. We have what's called the Boston Tea Party. You're going to look at that a little bit later on and how the Boston Tea Party really changes the game. Because after the Boston Tea Party, the British government decided it was time to punish the citizens of Boston. So they passed these two things called the Coercive or Intolerable Acts. And actually, it's a series of 4 acts, coercive or intolerables. And if you're coercing somebody, you're trying to convince them to do something. If it's intolerable, it means you can't really put up with it, right? So they decided to punish the colonists. And as a result, we will inch closer and closer to war. See, the French and Indian War required money to fight. They start passing taxes and laws on the colonists. Colonists get upset. Eventually, the battles escalate and we have our war. Hopefully this helped. Hopefully these notes help a little bit and it clears things up just a little bit. If you have questions, let me know.